in the final beats of this stream, we finally started to have a ongoing discussion.
Yes.
As
Other
opposed
than me showing
to
you weird crap.
yes, as opposed to the beginning, which we apparently had barely anything to say. Creepy Castle is a game that I love, but it doesn't lend itself very well for witty or funny commentary. That has to be acknowledged.
Indeed. I mean, it's just not for me. I can acknowledge the appeal to it, but it's just not for me.
Ross, that is absolutely fine. That's the adult way of looking at things. Like me and the new DuckTales, for example. There is nothing wrong with it, but there is just something about it that does not fundamentally click with me. And part of it might be just the realization that my DuckTales is not this version of DuckTales, and again, it's part of growing up. You just have to accept it. It has never happened to me.
Part of developing the critical eye, really, is just, you know, kind of understanding the merits of something, but also it not meshing with you either.
Yes, but I also, speaking of the criticism that I have for this show that I mentioned before, I also recognize that part of the elements that soured me on the whole experience was the show's inability to keep itself focused on a given narrative, because they introduce a whole overarching story in the first 2 episodes, then they drop that storyline at episode 3, and then they introduce a new storyline, and then they drop that storyline at episode 5, and then they have nothing but self-conclusive adventures up until episode 9 or 10. That's really not how you handle a show, or indeed specifically a show that is supposed to have multiple story arcs. On that note, probably the gravest offender is Star versus the Forces of Evil, which is another show that is made of 2 halves. One half is really good and engaging and well written and stupendously animated young adult fantasy. The other is the worst and most ill-conceived filler romantic subplots imaginable. Clashing together, you have a show of 2 halves that don't really meet smoothly in the middle.
I gotcha. I've seen that happen a lot of times, actually. When shows have elements, basically, or even themes that just they can't mesh together, or, you know, tones or whatever. It's not all that uncommon, really.
The biggest problem with Star is that at some point the story really becomes much, much bigger than the main character, or indeed her best friend / love interest, because it has to do with a pretty on-point commentary about racism and intolerance and elitarianism and white privilege, and now it's usually actually very well handled, but then the show suddenly remembers that this is supposed to be a short cartoon for little girls, so let's go back to the filler and to the forced romantic subplot that actually does not really add to the narrative. I'm going to say something nefarious and blasphemous right now.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say something nice about Inuyasha.
This ought to be interesting. Okay.
Okay, so Inuyasha is one of the worst shows that has ever been created.
I wouldn't go that far. It's not good, but I mean, it's not
good.
It's not that bad.
Okay, listen, it's not good. It has a ton of problems in terms of pacing, filler episodes, an interesting world to build itself from, but ultimately it is harmed by profoundly unlikable and disdainful characters.
Extreme repetition.
Yes, it has 1.5 million problems. Also, it is not a show that was really meant for either of us. But then again,
Correct.
it came at a period of time in which we were starved for anime, and there was little choice for shows to watch on television. So there was Inuyasha, and we saw it. Here's what it does right. The central romance of the story, whatever passes for a quote-unquote love story between Inuyasha and Kagome, which is just awful. The central romance, at the very least, was just that. It was the central romance.
Yes.
The narrative builds itself, spins itself around
it.
Not beside it.
Correct.
And that is the problem. That is the problem, the fundamental problem with Star versus the Forces of Evil. I have no reason to get invested in the romance, in the potential romance. I wouldn't anyway, because it's really bad in that sense. But I have no reason to, because the narrative overall has nothing to do directly with that romance. In fact, I dare say that half of the two main characters is useless to the narrative overall because it does not connect directly with them. They just so happen to be there because they have to be there because they are protagonists in that sense.
I gotcha.
It's pretty ridiculous, which is bad because you can tell that the showrunners, the writers, they really want to tell a very specific story, but they have to clash heads with...
You think it's basically network meddling?
I don't know if it is network meddling, but it is clear that Disney has, first and foremost, a certain type of branding in mind when it comes to this show. She's a Disney princess in one way or the other, so she has to have an ongoing teenage relationship problem, and if she doesn't, then we will create one.
I gotcha.
So it's that part of it is really disappointing, but the part of the story that are good, they are actually
very good. Gotcha.
Very good, yes, especially the season finale as of late, which wraps up a storyline but immediately leaves you hanging with another storyline that has just started.
That's a good way to do a season finale, as long as you get a continuation.
Disney had a lot riding on this show. In fact, they announced a second season as the first season wasn't aired yet.
Wow, that's a lot of faith.
So this and DuckTales, they are the two biggest cash cows in the Disney Channel right now. So this will not end anytime soon.
Alrighty. I don't really have much to add.
This is actually probably the best period of time for cartoons or animation in general.
Basically, you have Japan firing on all cylinders right now, and a lot of good American shows coming out, so it's...
You have a lot from all around the world, in fact, and since there is far more accessibility thanks to the internet, it is possible to be exposed to a lot of this. For example, I believe right now on Netflix, they have the entirety of the Wakfu show.
Oh, okay.
Wakfu, which I've been telling people for years, is probably the best non-Japanese anime ever made. Ever. I mean, you think Avatar is good. Wakfu blows it out of the water, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Have you seen Mary and the Witch's Flower?
I will at some point. I've seen the Masaki Yuasa film, Lu Over the Wall.
I'm really surprised you missed Mary and the Witch's Flower.
I will watch it at some point. It was not distributed theatrically here. So
we got kind of a limited theatrical release over here. I managed to catch it, and it
we
just
do,
hit on Blu-ray.
Yes, we do get those from time to time, but I refuse to watch those films with Italian dub. I refuse. I just categorically refuse.
Is the Italian dub really that bad?
It's not necessarily bad, but I have been conditioned to hate it for far too long.
You have been conditioned to hate it? Why?
Yes. I cannot stand the concept of localization or dub, because I've seen such horrifying examples of it.
I don't know. It depends on the show. I would say that comedies in general need to take more liberties than anything else just to make the humor translate well to a different region.
I don't like Italian dubs, generally speaking. They never sound right for me.
And this is someone that grew up on Italian dubs.
So you know I'm talking from experience.
Yes.
Yes, you have a DVD, you have a Blu-ray there. Congratulations. Kiki's Delivery Service was somebody's favorite film, I can tell.
Okay, so how did I describe the... I'll briefly try to describe the plot of this.
Don't describe it. I want the surprise.
In a comical fashion, I should say. So, this will probably make you want to watch it more, actually. So, Ginger Kiki, uses the power of magical blueberries to stop
Makes
Dr.
sense.
Robotnik from making fairies.
Okay.
To take over the world.
Okay, that much I knew already.
Oh, okay.
Seems fine.
Basically, when Studio Ghibli stopped making movies, half the studio was like, we still want to make movies. So, we're gonna go make our own studio to make movies. Bye.
They split apart, much like Studio Trigger was made of former Gainax employees.
Basically everyone that mattered from Gainax, really.
Yes, I can tell. That's why the animation in those Studio Trigger shows are really good. Did you know, fun fact by the way, to give you an idea of how much interconnected Japanese animation is to Western animation right now, the opening sequence, the opening credits for OKKO was animated by the co-founder of Studio Trigger.
Doesn't surprise me.
It has a very recognizable style. The guy, as you know, is actually a fan of the colorful expressivity of Western cartoons, and he likes to implement it as many times as he can. If you watch Little Witch Academia, which is really good, it's an homage to Western animation in many ways.
I haven't watched it because I don't have Netflix. So is Agretsuko here, too.
Definitely finish watching Agretsuko.
Yes, I only was 3 of the 10 episodes, so I need to finish that. I was enjoying it quite immensely.
It gets even better, especially when catharsis gets employed. And of course, you need to watch Wakfu. Wakfu is the single greatest flesh-animated cartoon of all time. It does a lot with what is mostly considered a limiting animation tool, which is impressive. I recommend also the sister series to Wakfu, which is titled Dofus, Secrets of Keroban. Just write down Dofus. And of course, all of the OVAs. And of course, the feature-length animated film, Dofus Book 1, Lilith, which, if you watch it after being exposed to everything else, it is the greatest present to a long-time fan of the series.
I will keep it in mind. If I have the ability to try an episode or 2, I will.
And this is a fun fact for you to digest. Wakfu is the greatest, also the greatest video game adaptation of all time, because
is showing.
Both Dofus and Wakfu were MMORPGs produced by Ankama Studios, and
I'm aware.
yes, Wakfu and Dofus, the shows, were made essentially to promote the games, but they ended up essentially superseding the game itself and becoming their own juggernaut.
And then they eventually made a new Wakfu game. A different Wakfu, like it was a strategy MMO.
No, that is the game I was talking about. That is the Wakfu game. No, because originally there was Dofus made in 2004. Then a few years down the line came Wakfu.
Okay, gotcha.
Which a beta of that was released more or less at the same time as I think season 1 of Wakfu was wrapping up. Or maybe at the very beginning in 2008.
Okay.
Either way, it's an interesting backstory and a lot of interesting and fun characters and their own races and lore and probably the most rich and fascinating fantasy world.
So I think it's really time to wrap this up. Next time that we get together the game, I'm showing you Grandia 2.
No, we should play PH Hacker in the Woods. I insist on that one.
It doesn't look like we're going to be gaming again next... Well, actually we might be. Devar is back, so hopefully we'll be able to Monster Girl next week.
That is not a verb.
Well, it is now.
It is not a verb. I have to insist.
What, you don't want to go monster girling?
You're drunk, Ross. Go home.
I am home and I'm not drunk.
Good night, everybody. You're drunk on life.